Hello and welcome to Behind the Scenes, a podcast where we talk about the intersection of art, culture, and big ideas. I'm your host, Sean Malone, the creative director for the Foundation for Economic Education and creator of Out of Frame, a video essay series on YouTube where we talk about movies and TV and all of the awesome ideas that they express. Here today, not in studio anymore, with Paul Nelson, our senior marketing manager and head of our social media team, and then, of course, Jen Mafsanti, the communications director of communications, I should say, for the Libertas Institute in Utah. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing a lot better than I was last week. That's for sure.
So you wanna give a quick synopsis of your story here?
Sure. I mean, it got me finally after 2 years. I got the Rona.
And what is this? The second time your kids had?
Yes.
Also, right?
Yeah. Thing one got reinfected with COVID. Thing two seems to have dodged it completely. But
it's so weird.
It is weird.
There's something like genetic about this, because I did the same thing, right? Like I've been around tons of people with COVID. My wife, my mother-in-law. And we had Michelle, our friend Michelle, over when she had COVID. I've never had a single symptom as far as I can tell. I do have antibodies. So I had some kind of, asymptomatic thing or whatever at some point. But I don't know. It's really weird because I feel like there must be something with specific people. But it's crazy that you've got twins and your twins. How's that?
They're not identical. So they're not any more genetically similar than any other set of brothers. And thing one has always been more like me than thing two is. In personality and also in just
just getting sick.
Physical tendencies. He gets migraines the same way I do, that sort of stuff. Bless him. I'm sorry, kiddo. That's the way it works.
It's be a heck of a life.
Yeah.
Paul, speaking of kids, how's your kid's finger?
Still the finger is healed up. Everything worked out well. Modern technology, saving 10 digits, keeping them to 10 digits. But so I mean that kids always keep you on your toes.
That's for sure.
Yeah. It's just crazy. I mean, the stories from you guys always, and it makes sense, but it's just like every couple months, it's always like, oh, kids are sick. And it's like, oh man,
kids are disgusting.
Vectors of disease, these children. I don't know. But that said, let's, it's not really a good segue, but I kind of feel like this movie is a vector of disease. So I'm gonna get into this. We're going to talk about today on the show. We want to talk about Adam McKay and David Sirota's new film, Don't Look Up, which is on Netflix original, I guess, and starring Leo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence and Meryl Streep and Jonah Hill and
everybody else too.
Yeah, and like everybody else, like every possible celebrity cameo they could stuff in here. Ariana Grande, I don't know, just cram it full of various celebrities. But the movie. So I just put out, as we're recording this, I just put out a YouTube short on Don't Look Up today, and this has been interesting for me doing the YouTube shorts because they're I'm not really used to condensing things quite this much in terms of especially out of frame episodes. Like we do it with Common Sense Soapbox all the time, where we'll have very, very short points and make something in a minute to 2.5 minutes or whatever. But without a frame, it's really hard to do. But I've been kind of enjoying it. I don't know. And in this case, it gave me a chance to just make one basically very simple, or actually kind of two very simple points about Don't Look Up, which I think we can explore more in depth here, which is one, I think the movie is unintentionally funny. I think it's an unintentional satire or a criticism of a lot of stuff that it doesn't really mean to criticize. So we'll get into how I feel about that in a little bit. But then the other thing too is like, I'm super not surprised because David Sirota wrote it. And that guy has a long history of writing really, really ridiculous things. So if you guys aren't familiar with him, I mentioned this in the short, but like, he wrote one of my favorite articles of all time. In 2013, he wrote Hugo Chavez's Economic Miracle, talking about how amazing Venezuelan socialism was. And literally like 2 years later, the entire thing starts just completely falling to pieces. And now, of course, we get people, and I've got all these people on the Jack Ryan episode telling me how it's not real socialism. But I can point you back to David Sirota's article back in 2013, where he, and I will say as kind of a representative of the extreme left in that case, absolutely claimed it as a victory for his ideology. And then now, of course, they're like, nah, it was capitalism all along, I'm told. But yeah, David Sirota will never live that down for me. He's had a bunch of other horrible takes. And now he's written a movie that subjected me to even more horrible takes. So, yeah, I don't know. You guys watch this? So I watched it like a week ago or so. I think you guys probably just watched it last night or the last couple days. Is that?
Yeah, I watched it last night.
First impressions?
Like, okay, sorry, y'all didn't see my face, but it was it was very disappointed. So it tried really, really hard. And it showed that it was trying really, really hard. And my opinion, short hot take here, this is not a satire. This is a diss track.
Ooh, interesting. Paul?
A diss track. Okay. Yeah, this movie was fine. I don't hate it as much as you guys do. I think that in their effort to try to make the allegory about climate change, they have unintentionally lampooned the people that they probably weren't trying to. So that's probably the most interesting thing to me is that a lot, and this happens quite a bit with movies and shows that try to do this, is if you just go, if everything you know of and think of in the world is just very surface deep, then when you try to make fun of something and be funny about things, then it falls apart pretty quickly. Because comedy is not easy. You have to be deeply in tune with what you're making fun of. That's why comedians are usually very depressed, outcasts, and they just make fun of themselves and their lives. And that's usually the recipe for success.
I mean, look, I think the funny thing though to me is that this movie was directed by written and directed by Adam McKay, right? I mean, Adam McKay did one of your favorite movies, right? I mean, I think he did Talladega, right? Talladega Nights. He did Anchorman 2. I mean, a lot of the Will Ferrell stuff. So like he's not unfamiliar with comedy. He did The Big Short, which is a very interesting movie. We've talked about it on the show before a little bit. I think The Big Short for me, it's a much better movie in that it uses humor in effective ways and gets a lot of ideas across that are very complicated using humor. Although my beef with The Big Short, as I've probably expressed here before, is that it really starts the story in the middle. It only takes a look at what was going on with Wall Street around the mid 2000s, rather than looking at what Fed policy was in the early 2000s and look at housing policy in the late 90s and things like that. All of that stuff, really, I guess I talked about this a lot on the Cowboy Bebop episode, actually, where we talked about like that whole history. And The Big Short just omits a lot of that because I don't think it fits the narrative Adam McKay wanted to share in that case. I think he wanted to promote this idea that greedy, investment bankers and, mortgage brokers and stuff were really the cause of the financial crisis. This is really not true. It's really, government policy, housing policy, and Fed policy, monetary policy. And so, I think he's kind of got a history of missing the point a little bit on these things. For me, this movie took it to a whole new level in missing the point. But Paul, I don't know that I hate it. I just think it's bizarre that to your point, like it absolutely unintentionally lampoons a bunch of stuff that I absolutely can't mean to lampoon. Because if you look at what it says about scientists, for example, and people running federal agencies, like scientific agencies, is really bad. Like the woman in the movie who runs NASA is completely incompetent and unqualified. She is what is she, like a psychiatrist or something? She's
anesthesiologist.
An anesthesiologist, yeah. And yet she's the head of NASA. And people in the movie are like, well, she's the head of NASA. Clearly she should know what she's talking about in terms of space stuff. But she's not. She's a politician. And if you compare this to somebody like Anthony Fauci, for example, it's a really obvious parallel to me. If you wanted to make it if you wanted to lampoon Fauci, this would be a perfect movie to do it, because here you've got a guy who hasn't practiced medicine in 40 or 50 years, who doesn't do medical research. Like he's got very little actual experience in that world, and yet he's making all of these decisions as if he is a doctor, in the same way that you think of when you're thinking of somebody who's got a lot of expertise. Really, he's a politician, right? And he's been a career politician since the 80s or whatever. So, and you can just go down the line, right? I mean, like the president is sort of a Trump analogy, but it's sort of an amalgam. It's like a Trump-Clinton mashup, which is like a weird move.
So I
don't know.
I feel like, we probably should do a synopsis for those of people that haven't watched it.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's do that first, because I have a lot of, I have a lot of questions for you guys. I have a lot of thoughts of what they were going for. But yeah, synopsis.
All right, so I'll do that. The gist of it is basically a pair of astronomers, just like a professional astronomer and somebody who's doing her PhD working together. The PhD student finds she just happens to spot a comet, that nobody's ever discovered before. They do some trajectory math. They find out that it's directly on course to hit planet Earth. Eventually they discover that this is actually a pretty big comet, and it's something that's, probably going to be an extinction level event. But unlike movies like, Deep Impact or whatever, Armageddon, in this movie, they go to the government and try to get people to care and do something about it. And everybody's just sticking their head in the sands. They're playing political games. They're ignoring it. And then they're, basically they don't do anything that they need to do until it's really, really too late to actually fix anything. And then when they finally do try to do something, it gets derailed again by an evil, well, not an evil, but by an Elon Musk type tech genius billionaire who, instead of wanting to stop the comet, wants to mine it for minerals and things. And so it's this it's meant to be a satire of global warming, climate change, whatever, and the fact that nobody seems to want to do anything about it. And everybody in it is incompetent, corrupt, whatever. Media figures are propagandists and sort of sticking their head in the sand, and everybody is eventually at the end of the movie is literally chanting "Don't look up," as if not seeing the fireball in the sky is going to stop it from destroying the planet. Which, this movie couldn't be more on the nose in a lot of ways. Leo is screaming at the camera. Jennifer Lawrence is screaming at the camera, telling us that we're all going to die. It's just, there's a lot of these things. But the plot is pretty straightforward. It's a pair of scientists go and try to warn the world about impending doom, and they get completely ignored by everyone until it's too late. So yeah, Paul, what are your questions and your thoughts about it?
So what I found interesting about this movie is that it did really end up mocking everyone The and it really rings true to me just based on my professional experience. Unfortunately, this is the analogy to climate change seems like a stretch to me, but I don't know if we want to talk about climate change science on this podcast, but this to me is I know Leo thinks that climate change is obvious and all that stuff, but whatever.
I mean,
anyways.
I don't think we need to talk about climate change science, but I think we could talk about the way that the media and government and celebrities and entertainment and everybody else talks about it.
Right.
Because I think that's the more interesting part of the movie to me, is that it paints this picture that when we talk about climate change, everybody's ignoring it, but that's literally the opposite of reality. You know, right. We talk about it all the time. They have giant international summits about it. Celebrities, Leonardo DiCaprio being a very good example of this, scream about it and warn and talk about it nonstop. Media figures talk about it. Journalists talk about it all the time. Like it's weird because it's exactly the opposite of the world that they're depicting in the movie. Like they're basically trying to say that everybody's just ignoring this threat, this planet killing threat. But everybody talks about climate change nonstop and has right. since I was a kid. So I don't understand. I don't understand that mentality.
Right, and that's why I'm looking at this more less of an analogy to climate change because I just
it's
don't
a bad one.
See it. I mean, I guess you could make it, but what I liked about this is that it didn't sugarcoat our government, the government's arms, the media, people that are very online political, all this stuff. I feel like they got pretty accurate. I would not be surprised if two scientists from Michigan State, which it's just Michigan State. It's not from any of the Ivy Leagues. They have to sit there and wait for the to get into the Oval Office to tell the president that we're all going to die in 6 months. Here's the pictures. Here's the proof. Not conjecture. Not we're going to raise the temperatures by 5 degrees in 100 years. We're going to die in 6 months. And then naturally the president is like, so it's a 75% chance. And just trying to put as much spin on it as possible.
Yeah. And no, that all does ring true. It just doesn't ring true for climate change.
No. And that's why I'm kind of thinking to myself, I kind of divorced myself from that because going into this, I'm like, it's all climate. And then it's like, this would happen in a earth ending event where a comet was coming. I could see this happening and this becoming a political thing because we've seen it time and again. COVID, climate change, all of this stuff that we should have serious discussions about and open debate is just turned into a political football. And I don't think a human ending comet would be any different, unfortunately, which I guess is a pretty bad look on the world, but our systems are, what's the word for it? The institutions are broken, have been subverted, and this to me does not ring that far off from the truth of what would actually happen.
Look, I agree with that, and I think that if you look at all the characters in the film. Okay, there are a lot of things that I think the film gets very wrong in the way that these people go about these things. One, nobody is going, in media especially, if you tell everybody they're going to die, there's going to be 9 million stories about it. They are not going to struggle to get on air to go distribute the message that we're world-ending situation.
The messenger, they did portray this pretty well. The messenger of that we're all going to die is very important. And
it is.
You see this with Greta Thunberg, like all this, time after time, on both sides. Yeah. It's always the messenger that always becomes bigger than the message.
So you know what's funny? Actually, my mom said something because my parents watched the movie, and they had said something about media training, and she was very offended by the idea of media training for a minute because she was like, "What? They're telling people what to say and how to," and I'm like, no. So media training, just so people understand this, media training is not meant to tell you what the message is. Media training is meant to tell you how to express the message in a way that people will actually listen to it. So you can have any message you want. It's just that there are certain things that don't play very well with audiences. Like, for example, crying and screaming on TV. It doesn't go very well, right? But a calm, collected, very professional sounding individual, that does play very well. Another thing media training tends to do is sort of disabuse people of their tics and their idiosyncrasies. Like if they say and or add interjections all the time, likes and, at the end of the days and things like that, try to make people a little bit more aware of when they speak. And so I kind of had to explain that to my mom, but she literally thought that the media training was so that they would not talk about the planet ending comet, which is not at all the case. But yeah, you do actually kind of need media training, and going out there with this bumbling sort of scientist and with the hyper emotional grad student was probably not a good choice.
No, it wasn't.
And by the way, but I will say the worst choice of all was sending them on a USA Today type or a Good Morning America type, like, morning talk show, because, like the whole like Good Morning America thing is not where you deliver this kind of bad news.
Oh my goodness.
Not the venue. I did love Tyler Perry. And
exactly. A significant portion of my actual job is very public relations related, and just the way that they went about getting the news in front of people. I was like, this is literally the worst way to do it. Like, you've screwed it up from the jump.
Yeah.
And
totally.
It was very infuriating because, like, Michigan State doesn't have an entire communications department that could have given them some of that training.
Yeah. Also the the stand-in for the New York Times, just have the reporter do it.
Yeah, of course. Right. The reporters do this all the time. And again, but you don't do it on Good Morning America. You do it on the nightly news. You do it at 6 p.m. You do it at 8. You do it on, every, like Anderson Cooper and Tucker Carlson. You do the rounds. And you go on all those shows and you talk about it in the context where people are expecting to hear bad news, which is basically nightly news. It's the bread and butter of nightly news. It is obviously not the bread and butter of Good Morning America, which is designed for people like Gordon Ramsay to come on and make eggs. Like, that's what that's for. But I will say, I want to reiterate, Cate Blanchett and Tyler Perry were fantastic.
And they're very funny.
They really were.
I've said this before. I love Tyler Perry as an actor. I feel like it's weird that he doesn't do that much outside of the Medea stuff, because the Medea stuff is like, it couldn't be less for me as an audience. Like, I don't like it, really anything about it. But every time I've seen him in a role in a film, in something like this, for example, he knocks it out of the park, and it's always great. So he was super funny, and both him and Cate Blanchett played this like awkward, like really trying to like keep things on track for their, we like to keep it light here. We like to keep it, it's just like, yeah, well, you can't really keep the end of the world that light. So maybe this is not the venue for you. Maybe we should pick a different show. And they should have, but they didn't. But that's, there's a level of incompetence there. I think there's there's incompetence throughout, right? I think you're totally right that the president and chief of staff and all of those people would really botch this if it were happening. I think all of the heads of most of the agencies would probably botch this. I think people really don't understand that most of the agency heads they're career politicians. They're not really experts in any of the things that they're doing, and we hope that the bureaucracies are sort of filled with people who do have some level of expertise. But to be honest, for the most part, they're not either. They're people who, are kind of middling students in college who got a gig in government because it was easy, or because they could, or because they have political aspirations. They want to move their way up and become the head of the EPA or the, whatever, most of the people who are really competent engineers go work for Elon Musk. Although we should talk about that character, like we should talk about this billionaire, what was his name? Sorry. Peter Isherwell, the Mark Rylance's character. Like, I found him to be kind of grating personally, and not particularly believable.
He reminded me more of Bill Gates than Elon.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
In this context, if it's an analogy to climate change, why would you be mocking Bill Gates?
Yeah, he's on the forefront of all that. But it's the same thing for all this stuff, right? Like, if you were going to mock people, so for example, if you wanted to take this and mock people who deny that COVID exists, for example, like, because I think that's another area where I think a lot of people who fall into Adam McKay's camp, and certainly David Sirota's and all that, I think that they would want to see, they'd point to these kind of rednecks who are chanting "Don't look up," and they'd say, "Oh, the virus isn't real; it's all fake, whatever." But then, why would you mock the head of? I mean, effectively, if you're looking at that as your analogy, and translating all that stuff to the real world, then the head of NASA is the stand-in for Fauci, and the Isherwell character is the stand-in for Bill Gates, or for somebody who's trying to push mandatory vaccination for everybody. And then it's all these rubes who are saying, oh, this is, we shouldn't have to get vaccinated or whatever. I don't know. It just seems like you're really shooting yourself in the foot by the people you've chosen to mock, if your goal is to make me believe that there are competent people telling me the truth. Because in the very end, by the way, and this is kind of a spoiler, but I feel like I could say anything about this movie, it wouldn't really wreck anything. It's such a simple plot at this point. But at the end of the day, the person who is most trustworthy is a woman shouting at people on YouTube. Like, fundamentally, it's a woman who dropped out of college or didn't finish her degree, didn't finish her PhD, and is working as a bagger at a grocery store, and who is making YouTube videos telling you the truth. That can't be what they meant to end with, can it? I mean, that can't possibly be. Like, are they really saying that, like, on climate change and on COVID and on, you name it, whatever major scientific issue of the day, that it's the YouTuber, it's the random YouTuber who I'm supposed to pay attention to? Is that really what they're getting at? Because that seems like it was the lesson.
Yeah, that's what the lesson looked like. I mean, and that is why I genuinely think that this movie fails as a satire, because satire, I have strong feelings about satire. It's super important that we have it. And when it is executed well, it is some of the most brilliant social commentary that you will ever encounter in your life. And one of my personal favorite satirists, wrote fantasy novels about a literal flat earth. And so, you start out, you start that story reading a fantasy story, and it's about, the premise is about, witches and vampires, right? That's what you got into that book for. But what you really got out of the book was a lesson about the nature of faith and the nature of truth. And that is what makes a really great satire. And it was hilarious all the way through.
What book and what author? Jen?
That is Terry Pratchett.
Yeah.
And this is his Discworld series. And that specific book that I was talking about is Carpe Ugulum. I'm probably not pronouncing that right. Seize them by the throat is the Latin there. And it is about witches and vampires. And it is also about the nature of faith and the nature of truth.
Yeah.
And it's outstanding. And every single one of his books is like that.
it's so easy to fail at satire, I think, because if you're not clear about your point, and if you're not clear about your targets and what the stand-ins for reality are actually going to be, which I think happened in this movie throughout, it's like you end up with this really muddled lesson, which is, again, like we live in a world right now where Joe Rogan is like actively being attacked by almost everybody in what we might call the mainstream media, mainstream press, government, everybody else. YouTube doesn't like him. None of the major news outlets like him. And of course, by the way, it just came out that, Rogan's audience per episode is just dwarfing, even Tucker Carlson. I mean, like he's like twice or more than twice Tucker Carlson's nightly audience. He is like 10 times what CNN's nightly audience is right now, and so of course they're attacking him constantly. People are trying to get him canceled. People are trying to shut down certain episodes. They're trying to get rid of the Robert Malone episode and the McCullough episode. And by the way, that to me seems like the much better parallel in all of this, which is like, if there's anyone who's getting a black bag put over their head and getting arrested and like carted away before they can say the truth as they see it, it's those kinds of people. It's the Robert Malones who have their Twitter accounts suspended. It's, Martin Kulldorff. It's those kinds of guys who have had critical things to say about the mainstream view of things. But that's the problem, is that is actually happening. It is real. It is real life, except for it's not happening to any of the people that Adam McKay is trying to support. So like, that's where the whole movie kind of goes off the rails to me. Like, you want to say that this certain type of person is this like, this haggard doomsayer who's being ignored and arrested and sort of marginalized, when the people that he's actually talking about in real life, their real life counterparts, they're the ones who are going to the Oscars, and being broadcast on every major media platform that exists. And it's the people that he despises who are the ones who are being attacked and threatened and pulled off the air. So that's what I don't get about it. Like, it's just
this movie really missed the mark in who it was attacking is the thing. And because of that, that is why, to me, it did not feel like a satire. It did not read like a satire. It read like a diss track. It was one dude being real salty at all of the people he doesn't like.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's the show. That's not satire. That's a tirade.
Yeah. And it's apparently a lot of people, actually.
Yeah.
Because it's sort of everybody. It's like they seem to be upset with like your obviously they're upset with like political Republican elites, and they're sort of Meryl Streep Trump stand-in, and Jonah Hill's kind of like Trump Jr. or Ivanka stand-in. Ivanka or Ivana? Which one?
Ivanka.
Ivanka
with a K.
That's the one. Those stand-ins, right? But then you also have like what could be stand-ins. Meryl Streep is, like I said, kind of an amalgam of like Trump and Hillary to some extent. And then you also have, all of these heads of agencies and things like that who, you'd think are stand-ins for people that Adam McKay would respect otherwise, but apparently doesn't. And then of course you've got all the kind of, dumb citizenry, the unwashed masses who are all too dumb to understand or too blind to care or whatever, too politically. Like Jennifer Lawrence's character's parents, for example, come in and they're she's kind of down and out. It's kind of her dark night of the soul, and she goes home to her parents, and before her parents allow her in the house, they say, well, hey, we're going to let you in. We love you, but no political talk in the house because we support the jobs that the comet is going to bring. And it's just like, but why would the comet bring what jobs? It's obviously going to, smash into the planet. So that's not really job. It's just all that kind of stuff is too dumb I think, to be really clear, but it definitely expresses this idea that there's no respect for anyone in this, Leonardo DiCaprio's character, you'd think is going to be the one, sort of the guy who's kind of pulling everything together, but instead he becomes just corrupt and, enthralled by fame and status and he becomes attractive to Cate Blanchett's, news reporter character. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It just seems really confused to me at the end of the day.
I can definitely, I think it depends on where you land on the spectrum, how you feel about this movie. And I think you could read multiple ways into it. You could read into like, oh yeah, all these, Adam McKay's, what he would say is that this is climate change, or on the complete opposite side is you could read it as, don't listen to politics, media, politicians, media, the scientists, listen to the YouTuber that gets silenced.
Yeah.
And also,
I think objectively
the only solace that you're going to have in this life before you're blown off into smithereens is faith in God. Like that, like there's so wildly dramatically different readings you could take from this.
I know, but to be honest, I think if you look at the movie with really objective eyes, I think the second interpretation is the better one. I think that's the interpretation that's actually supported by the events of the story and by the characterizations
before us here
of all the people, which it's clearly not what they wanted to do. Adam McKay made Adam McKay did this himself, but like the movie has an associated website, which I suppose we could link, but I don't know that I want to give it any additional traffic. It's the Don't Look Up Climate platform, and it's got some nice links at the top. It says just look up, and it says all the steps. And basically it goes through, it's very branded to the movie and everything else. And it's got some comments and whatever. And they have ways for you to keep politicians accountable and to choose responsible financial institutions and fund. But this is all for climate change, right? It's obviously there's not a comet headed towards Earth tomorrow. By the way, what's funny too about the whole Mark Rylance sort of tech billionaire guy, Elon Musk is the only guy I can think of right now who's really spent a lot of time talking about how important it is to get planetary defense, like from comets and from rogue asteroids and things like that. He's one of the only guys I can think of who's actually talked about the fact that the biggest actual threat to humanity and to human civilization is something like this, something like what's happening in the movie. That's something that could literally destroy the planet without us being able to do anything about it at all, and people
and
call him.
That's why he's so anxious to get to Mars. Honestly, it's like a backup planet.
He's talked about this for a long time, and having a backup planet is sort of in a way, it's probably kind of plan B, right? Defend Earth as much as you can, but then also kind of have colonies off world that make sure that we survive even if the planet gets destroyed or whatever. And
but we're not allowed to listen to Elon Musk anymore, apparently. So
we're not. That's what I was going to say. Like, I think it's funny because meanwhile, you've got everybody saying how he's such a stupid guy for doing this, and how instead of spending any money on rockets and going to space and satellites and possibly going to Mars, he should be, doing philanthropy with all of that money instead, right?
I fail to see how this escapes the definition of philanthropy, though. Like, he's literally trying to save humanity.
No, he is putting an awfully large amount of money into something that could potentially save billions of people, our entire planet, in fact. And he does not seem to be getting a very good return on that investment in the short term. So, no, it feels pretty philanthropic to me, but everybody would rather he goes to a soup kitchen.
Even taking a more business example of the Starlink stuff, that when that comes, I mean, it's working now, but when it gets more ubiquitous, that is going to solve so many more issues that we hear all that. Like, the reason net neutrality is because we got to get it out of the hands of these monopolists with the control over the cable internet, and he's fixing that problem. So is Facebook. I mean, like, these are big players, but this is also going to give the opportunity for people anywhere in the world to have connection to the internet that cannot be controlled by a government and be censored. This is massive stuff. And
it's amazing.
Yes, he's going to make a money on it, but like
How
it's
dare
solving
he?
a lot of issues.
Right.
How dare he? The audacity of that man.
It's going to be incredible. I mean, look, so if all goes well, I haven't talked about this yet on the show, but if all goes well, my wife and I are about to buy a new house, and we're about to move farther out into the middle of nowhere. Right now, we kind of live in a neighborhood, right? It's in a pretty rural area overall, but like we live in a little developed area, but we're about to move out into an acreage separate from, municipal plumbing and stuff like that. Right. So, I mean, I think we're going to be able to get cable because the people living there now have cable, but there are a lot of people who live in much more remote areas, or perhaps even would want to live in much more remote areas, but who would, still benefit tremendously from access to the internet. And I'm just talking about in the United States. Obviously, there's entire continents filled with people who don't have internet access. I mean, the vast majority of Asia, the vast majority of Africa, huge stretches of Australia do not have internet access because it's just too hard to run fiber optics that far. I mean, you just can't. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to do that. That's massive. I mean, the idea that somebody could have high-speed internet in the middle of Ghana, in wherever, in the middle of nowhere, basically, is one of the most impressive things that anybody could ever do for humanity. And he's still he's persona non grata for all this stuff. It's like we should hate him constantly for wasting everybody's resources as if it's not his money.
I mean, he privatized space exploration. He's working really, really hard to get high-speed internet to the most impoverished people in the world. And he made electric vehicles absolutely cool. But forget him. He's the worst.
He's the worst. He's the worst. I know. It's super weird to me. So I don't know. Let's get into sort of final thoughts on this, and then maybe we can get into some viewer questions afterwards. But final thoughts on Adam McKay and David Sirota's Don't Look Up. Jen, why don't you start?
The best part of this movie was Dirty Timothy Chalamet, and that's it. That's why you should watch this movie, is for that guy. That one single character that actually didn't serve any purpose to the story whatsoever.
He got to hold hands with Jennifer Lawrence at the end of the world.
He gave a lovely prayer.
He did
at the dinner table,
and then he was embarrassed by it.
Yeah, but that was my favorite part.
Nice.
Paul,
this movie was fine. Easily forgettable. It's going to win
all the awards though, Paul. It's going to win the awards.
Probably. I don't think any of the performances were that great. I don't find yelling into the void to be that convincing and that interesting. But this movie has the problem that all Netflix things have. It's way too long. You could cut a good 30 minutes probably pretty easily and tighten it up. I think that'd be
very easy.
The second act seemed to just drag. I was like, we get it. We know what's happening. We got it, but let's move it on. And then it gets, I don't know, it's way too long. But I think it's just, I don't know. I understand why people want to talk about it. It has some interesting ideas. They mock somebody for everyone. So even if you don't agree with what the analogy they think, they're mocking people that you would mock and vice versa. So, equal opportunity mocking, which is nice. It's fine.
I feel like it's worse than fine, but I also would say that it's like a perfect movie for YouTube Shorts if I'm going to keep doing these, because it's a movie that I do not want to do a full episode of Out of Frame on. Like, I don't have that much to say about it other than what I've already said and what I was kind of able to convey in like 60 seconds in the short. I expanded on it a lot here, but like in general, this is what I would say about it. It is mocking a lot of people sort of aimlessly. It is not at all persuasive on the message that its creators wanted to get out of it. And it does kind of have a counterproductive satirical effect that I think it absolutely doesn't intend. And so, that's kind of how I feel about it. It is the worst movie I've ever seen. No, I mean, there are funny bits in it. There are some good performances. Again, I would point to Cate Blanchett and Tyler Perry, probably the most entertaining of the movie. But for the most part, I'll never watch this again. It really shouldn't get any awards, but it probably will. It's going to get a bunch of awards, I would be willing to bet. But I disagree with all of them preemptively. I
mean, if Dirty Chalamet wins Best Supporting Actor, I think it's all worth it.
He was in it for like 4 minutes.
This is the best 4 minutes of the movie.
I was like, oh, finally, somebody that's actually interesting.
But we're not going to take the time to get to know him. So, yeah. All right, star rating. I'll start. I was going to give it 0 stars. I was going to give it a quarter of a star. I'm going to give it 0 stars. None from me, dog.
that's no stars for you.
0 stars. Is not even Chalamet can get like a quarter star out of me.
I don't care about Chalamet. He doesn't do it for me.
Just for the message that they portrayed, which is listen to Joe Rogan and go to church. I'm going to give it a quarter of a star.
Jen?
0.25. I think we're on the low end of the internet.
Yeah. No stars from Jen. It's nope.
Brutal. All right. Well, that concludes our discussion of Don't Look Up. For those of you who are fans of the show and who are supporting us already on Patreon or Subscribestar, it's patreon.com/outoframeshow or subscribestar.com/outoframeshow. Stick around and we are going to do some viewer questions. We've got one lined up here from Discord that's going to be, I think, a perfect fit for the movie. If you're not a subscriber, please consider, throwing us a few bucks every month. It helps us keep Out of Frame going. It helps us keep the podcast going. It also, you get a lot of access to things like this, to behind the scenes stuff, to private groups on Discord, and of course to Q&A and, bonus content that we do on the podcast. So consider doing that. If you're not ready to do that yet, still subscribe to us on YouTube. Check us out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, the whole deal. And then join our email list, which is awesome. From there, we will see you next week. And have a good day.